I was thinking about the difference in the lives of my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and my partner's paternal grandmother. And it really makes the Roe v. Wade thing so poignant, right? Um, my son woke me coughing last night. He coughs because he has asthma and he can't breathe, and so he uses a nebulizer every night. And if he doesn't get enough albuterol in his system, he'll just wake up in the night coughing. And so I was sitting on my porch, and I couldn't go to sleep for like 2 hours. I was still awake, and I sat on the porch. It was a beautiful night, somewhere in the 70s probably, drinking Fireball whiskey. And I was thinking about this last night. My grandmother married my grandfather with some idea that he had polio. I think that's what it was he had, but they didn't think he could have babies, and that was part of what she liked about him, I think, because she was forced to drop out of high school at the beginning of her senior year because her mother, my grandma Winnie Bell, had what they call a change of life baby. And I've since then learned that the change of life baby was, she was 39, which was the age I was when I had my third child, third of four children. And so she was forced to drop out of high school to take care of her younger siblings. And so she got married to escape that. My grandfather, they told stories about how, um, and again, this is my great grandma Ethel's house, and I have no personal experience with this, but my aunt has said that you could see through the floorboards and the dirt underneath because there was no subflooring of any kind. My grandparents had bought a similar kind of shack, and my grandmother, when she was pregnant with my father, her third child, and she had a child every 2 years or less, her mother would take the kids when they were a little over a year to help wean them. Um, and so when she weaned them, that's when she got pregnant, and so she had another baby. And this happened 5 times in a row. So within 10 years, she had 5 children, 5 boys. And so when she was pregnant with my dad, the third child, they used a wheelbarrow and a shovel and a board to go down underneath the house to dig out the basement. And they eventually sold that house and they bought the farm. My grandmother felt guilty that her boys had to milk the cows before and after school. Her husband also had a job. And so she didn't want them to have to do that. So she didn't really have them do what was called, female work. 3 of the 4 boys divorced. I say 4 boys because the fifth child, the baby John, when he was 18 months old, well, my grandmother has felt guilty her whole life because of this, because she had prayed to God and she said that, she couldn't handle 5 boys. And so when that baby was 18 months old, he got pneumonia and he died. And my grandfather blamed her because she didn't take him to the doctor earlier in the day because she didn't have a second car. They only had one car. She was waiting for him to get home from work. But he blamed her, and he told her how he blamed her for that baby's death. And so she felt guilty her whole life that that baby had died. And so my dad was born in 1953. So that's what we're approaching the 60s at this point. And my grandmother, the doctor told my grandfather that either my grandmother got a job or she would end up in the mental institution because she was so depressed that this had happened. She was so distraught. And so she got a job, and they both worked at a bottling company, my grandfather and my grandmother. My maternal grandmother also, by the way, worked. She was a Bell telephone operator. My mother said that growing up, she would yell out in the middle of the night, "Your number, please." So my mom said that they would have to shout out any number, and then she'd say, "Thank you," and she'd stop. So my grandmothers both worked. So this idea that they have of and you talk about this in feminist literature, that they were vacuuming in pearls. Like my family, my mother's, the women were all working, and my grandmother talked about what a blessing it was when birth control became available to her, because she didn't have the continual pregnancy, delivery, nursing, caring for the child. She couldn't go to the grocery store. My grandmother had to do the shopping because she would get a package of hot dogs, a package of grapes, and they would eat all of them before she got to the checkout. Um, but I think about that in comparison to my partner's grandmother. She was married to a hospital administrator. They were a few years older than my parents, David's parents. So this would have been slightly earlier. Um, she had one pregnancy. She had twins, two boys. They didn't have any more. And I realized they're all dead now. You can't ask them. But I realized they had access to birth control before it was legally available to my grandmother. How that shaped my family. We are so lucky to have access to birth control. You know, I got pregnant when I was 17, and I had that baby when I was 18 because I didn't have access to birth control because the family planning clinic was a 40-minute drive from my house, and I didn't have a car or a driver's license, and neither did he. And my culture kept that information from me. Like they wanted you to know about abstinence. They told you about horrible diseases. They didn't tell you how to stay safe. And I was very sheltered and very naive. And I think about that. I felt such a sense of guilt for having her at that age because I felt like I had done something terrible. But I realized I was just I'm an accommodator. I accommodate people. I always have been. That's how I was raised. I was raised to accommodate people. And after she was born, he came back from Okinawa, so he missed her birth. She was 10 months old when he met her. And I remember, like, I know as a teenager, like, I had a sense that if I needed to have sex so that I could be a grown-up. Like, it was a sense of, like acquiring that, that level, right? Like, but, like, I didn't understand that I might have sexual feelings, but it wasn't for the person in the room. And so when he came back from Okinawa, I would say to him, you know, please stop touching me because it makes my skin crawl. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. I was revolted by his touch. And I didn't understand why. But I realized, you know, years later, I became attracted to somebody for the first time in my life. And I was like, oh my God, this is what attraction is. And I never felt that before. And I realized that's what it was. I wasn't attracted to him. And I would just accommodate him. And, you know, our society blames women for so many things, right? The difference it makes in our lives. It's such a difference. And they want to take those rights away from us, that bodily autonomy. Which is why I left him, right? Because people say, well, why did you leave him? Why did you guys break up? I said, because he tickled me. And they were like, what? And you know, I couldn't articulate that he didn't respect my autonomy. And he would touch me in ways I didn't like. And I didn't have a way of stopping it. I didn't have a way of saying no. And I carried that guilt, that shame for just decades, you know? My partner and I, you know, we seem like the quintessential American family, right? Two white people with two white, almost blonde babies, you know? They have dark brown hair, or light brown hair, you know, it's dark blonde. It just seems so normal. But I feel anything but. And I have 3 daughters. I fear for them. I fear for them so much. But won't they have access?